Welcome everyone to Church and Society. I'm Reverend Phil Dieke. I'm sitting here at White Rock United Methodist Church, and today I'm joined by the staff of Texas Impact. We're on Zoom once again. One of these days we'll actually be able to be back together, and the benefit is all of y'all, or at least some of you at Texas Impact, are down in Austin. Scott, you're down in Houston, right? Isn't that you're in the Houston area?
Close, Huntsville.
Okay, Huntsville. So that's the beauty, right? We learned over the last 18 months is that we can bring all of our people together no matter where we're at. And so there's downfalls of Zoom. One day we'll get together and we'll celebrate church and society things and make a big impact in the world together. Right now, we're going to be on Zoom. So I'm grateful for the staff of Texas Impact to come and join us for this lunch gathering. I've invited folks as you're joining to come in and just let us know where you're joining from, what faith community you represent in the chat. And then once we get to Q&A kind of toward the end, then you can introduce yourself as you ask a question. And so we'll know where you're coming from and what you're representing. So I really, our time together, what we're going to do is spend a little bit of time reflecting on the Texas Legislature and the third special called session. Josh, the last one? Is it going to be the last one?
We'll see. There's rumors abound.
Rumors abound about at least one more. And then we'll spend a lot of our time focused on an event we're going to co-host together on November 13th. That's going to be all things voting. And so I remember sitting down at First UMC right outside the Capitol, and you guys were interviewing and talking about like eventually this voter suppression bill is going to pass. And at that point, we're going to have to put all of our efforts into elections and voting. And here we are. You were foreshadowing quite well. So this is going to be our effort to put all of our eggs in that basket and really focus on voting. So Bee, Josh, Scott, thank you for being with us. If you want to introduce yourselves, I'd love to hear what you do and just give us your role specifically at Texas Impact. And then if Josh, if you're going to go first and catch us up on what happened at the legislature.
So I'm going to introduce myself first. I'm Bee Morehead. I'm the director of Texas Impact. And Phil, do you want me to just say super quickly what Texas Impact is?
Oh, that would probably be helpful if people don't know. Yeah.
Okay. So Texas Impact is the state's membership organization for faith communities that is institutionally based. It grew out of the Texas Conference of Churches. We now no longer have the Texas Conference of Churches. So Texas Impact is in Texas, the unique organization that judicatories and other denominational bodies from Christian and non-Christian traditions belong to. So we have about 25 denominational bodies that are our members, that have board members who sit on our board. We also have, I think, about 25,000 individual and congregational members. We are colleagues with organizations like Texas Impact in most other states. So most states have something that is similar to Texas Impact. Texas Impact is probably one of the biggest ones in the country in terms of kind of our footprint and the number of people we have participating, and also the number of issues that we take on. We started as an outgrowth of the Sharpstown scandal, which people may or may not remember was a big political campaign scandal in the early 1970s. So Texas Impact started in 1973, not to take on any specific policy issue, but to ensure that the faith community was playing an integral role in ensuring the strength of Texas participatory democracy. That particular point, that we didn't start on any particular issue, we started as a vehicle for the faith community to participate in democracy, has never been more important than it is today, I think. And what Josh is going to talk to you about is how working on the issues is important, but if we don't start from a strong base of democracy, we're not going to be able to work on any of the issues that are important to us. So I'm going to turn it over to, I guess, Scott, if you want to introduce yourself real quick and then pitch it to Josh and he can introduce himself and get us going.
Yeah, just real quickly, Scott Atnip, I'm the engagement director for Texas Impact. And so I have the opportunity to work with people like you and your congregations to figure out how we can engage Texans of faith throughout the state and mobilize people to engage in this important work for justice and improving our communities. And I'll talk more about how congregations can get involved later. But for now, turn it over to Josh.
And thank you for having me. I'm Joshua Houston. I'm the Advocacy Director at Texas Impact. I'm an attorney and registered lobbyist. And I'm going to chat a little bit about kind of where we've been for the last 10 and a half months now. So the legislature is a 2-year life cycle. It's for 140 days, once every 2 years. It is an odd numbered years. This year was a little longer. It was 230 days due to all the 3 different special sessions. And during that 140 days, or whenever they're in session, we often come to you, encouraging you to talk to your members. When you do, you're asking them for their vote on a piece of legislation. We should not forget that for the vast majority of that 2-year life cycle, 590 days, it's actually the opposite. They're coming to us asking for our vote for them for office. And so we'll pick up our story. There's really no beginning or end to a life cycle, right? I mean, it just repeats, but we'll pick it up in September of 2020. That's when our board met. Our board sets our legislative agenda. They do it every 2 years at a retreat. Our board is overwhelmingly appointed to us by the member denomination. So North Texas Annual Conference gets 2 appointees. Phil is one of our 2 representatives, or one of your 2 representatives, I should say, on the board. Their job is to make sure that the positions we take are going to be consistent with that of the member denomination. So they all have to agree, which is a consensus agenda. So when they met this time, it was 6 months into the pandemic. We had had a summer of unrest over racial, police shootings of unarmed African Americans and people of color. And we had a sitting president attacking and making unfounded accusations against voting by mail and concerning things were happening administratively at the U.S. Postal Service. So our board they adopted a large agenda, but then they categorized it into kind of 5 big priority areas. 1, voting rights; 2, racial justice; 3, LGBTQ equality; 4 is healthcare; and 5 is climate. And we all know, I won't give you a big long history of what happened in between September and the session, but we had a major threat and a major stress test to our democracy. So let's look at how those legislative priorities fared as part of this life cycle. They did not fare well. You might say they were run over with a Mack truck for a number of reasons. Some of them are structural and some of them are political, but to kind of recap, as soon as the committees were announced, which was in, I think, early February, around that time, people who observed the Texas Legislature, lobbyists, could look at those committees and see how they were structured and could tell that they were appointed in a way that was very different. That for the last decade, you could always see where the various firewalls and bottlenecks would be based on who was appointed to what committee and how they were structured. That was not present this time. And that was a foreboding moment. And then you have on top of that, a unique thing about, well, not unique, it happens once every 10 years, the specter of redistricting. So courage is not always a trait that we think innate to elected officials. It's part of the way the system works, right? They're looking for your vote. That's not criticism, it's just the way we designed it. But it's especially true in a redistricting year because their individual futures, their advancement, their maintenance, or the end of their political career is on the line every 10 years when they draw those districts. And then even when the dust settles on the maps for that beginning of the decade, those districts are drawn in a partisan way to be very safe for whatever party is currently in control of that district. So that means, and that's relevant not from a partisan perspective, but from a structural perspective, because that means that in this case, it's always about 90%, but 95% of the Texas legislature will be decided, not effectively decided, in the March primary, whichever party the elected official belongs to. That's the race that matters the most to 95% of them. So March is more important than November as far as deciding what the legislature will look like. And so with those districts, with there being even fewer swing districts, there's more incentive to make sure you adhere to whatever the majority of your party thinks, because what you're worried about is that primary race. So let's look at the issues and where we landed. On climate, it's kind of the quickest to dispense with because nothing happened. The renewable energy sector at this point is largely strong enough to be able to defend itself from attacks, but barely. They are often under assault, both administratively at the executive branch level, but then also in the legislative cycle, where a number of attacks on renewable power had to be fended off with a high degree of lobby effort. But most of the big structural issues to the electric grid were largely punted on. They were not taken up by the legislature. So we will be talking about the electric grid in the next 2 years, at least, for at least the next 2 years. On health, that's probably one of the few silver linings, and it's not that I don't want to overstate that, right? A couple of good things happened. And you should credit the Texas House for this. That was one of the few bipartisan things that occurred in the regular session. Children's health, they switched from 6 months to 12 months, the period of time for renewal. It's an administrative thing, but it led to children getting kicked off out of their health insurance program on these 6-month cycles. It's now at least 12 months, so it's more period of time they'll be covered. And then for postnatal, for women, postnatal coverage, they've increased it to 6 months as opposed to whatever number of weeks it was. So that is something. Nevertheless, I don't want to overstate it because while it's important for those that it helped, it's not transformative. We're still the most uninsured state in the nation. We have not expanded Medicaid. Rural hospitals are still at risk of closure. We still have very serious structural issues in our healthcare system. On LGBTQ equality, it was a valiant effort by advocates, but it was not the success of the 2017 session where the bathroom bill was defeated. It was quite the opposite. There was a full-blown assault on trans kids. That was the focus of most anti-LGBT efforts. The governor had the Department of Family and Protective Services write a memo that said that parents that pursue gender-affirming medical care are child abusers. It is unknown if that has been enforced yet, or if it will be, and there's no known litigation so far, but watch that space, as they say. And then about last week, I guess it was, they passed House Bill 25, which requires school children to compete on the sports team that corresponds to the gender assigned at the time of birth. The reality of it is that a child is going to be forced out of sports if they don't want to be forcibly outed, or they must reveal private medical information. That's the choice that kids have to face. The reality is that there are no known incidents of cisgender girls being disadvantaged by competing alongside transgender girls in Texas. It is a question best left to medical science, and there is no indication that the UIL policy was not working just fine. So despite the governor's actions, the forces of discrimination are coming back for more. They've already called for it. They will try to cut off healthcare access for transgender youth. And the Senate already voted in the regular session to make the parents of trans children child abusers and to have the state be able to remove children on those grounds. On race, the George Floyd Act failed. And instead of reform, they passed several anti-protest bills instead. And then on a separate thing, critical race theory, sort of like the Red Scare or how they used to censor the reading of The Catcher in the Rye. The new boogeyman is critical race theory, and they passed very confusing legislation that micromanages how teachers talk about racial issues in the class. That is now law. On redistricting, it is an issue of race, frankly, despite the census showing that 95% of the state's growth came from non-white Texans. Non-white districts decreased in the new maps. So looking at just Hispanics as an example, the population in Texas is now 39% Anglo, 39% Hispanic. We've reached dead parity, practically. The Texas House, so currently, even though Hispanics are 39% of the population, only 22% of the districts are drawn for Latinos. So that's currently 33 seats. Under the new maps, that decreases from 33 to 30. So now we're dropping from 22% of the seats to 20% of the seats being majority Latino. I'm not counting African Americans because I haven't looked at I saw the MALDEF complaint this morning for that fact. But I know from the debate, having watched it, the same is true for the African American population as well. This is true in Congress. In Congress, we had 36 seats in which 8 were majority Latino districts. Now we have 38 seats, so 2 additional seats, but only 7 of those seats are going to be for Latinos. So they somehow lost one despite gaining 2 new seats. So it's 22% to 18%. This is not representation of Texas, which brings me to voting rights. Voting rights are absolutely a racial justice issue. In fact, it's probably the most important thing you can do for racial justice in 2021, which was still true. It was true in 1965. It was true in 1870. It's still true today. It's such a big topic that we're giving it its own category. So in the regular session, a number of smaller bills passed. The most notable one is Senate Bill 1111, which will affect people with addresses that change a lot. It's kind of the best way to say that. It's an arcane set of changes, but to sum it up, if you mess up a response to a jury summons, you may find yourself having your voter registration canceled if you don't respond the right way. And if you don't understand the legal difference between a residence and a domicile, you may end up finding yourself with your voter registration canceled. It will disproportionately, I should say, affect college kids, homeless, and workers who are more transient than others. And then there's Senate Bill 1. This was the big one. There was, as you'll recall, during the regular session, a quorum break stopped this bill temporarily. Then when we came back in a special session, it became clear that there would be no compromise on the policy, which sparked a second quorum break in the first special session. Eventually, quorum was restored and they did pass Senate Bill 1. It is marginally better than some of the earlier versions, but it is still extremely problematic. So problematic that for the first time in this organization's history, we sued over it. That is not, we usually do legislative advocacy almost exclusively, but in this case, we engaged in policy advocacy in the judicial branch. Let's talk about it a little bit. There are many concerning things.
Not very.
But the most concerning is poll watchers and election judges. Our membership is very much involved in election judging. We do it as a staff. We've been saying y'all should do it for many, many years, and you do, you've told us. It's absolutely critical. It's the number one thing that election administrators say they need. Our membership is super critical to the effort. We are 50% Democrat, 42% Republican, and 8% mixed in our primary voting histories when I look at the database and run it against the voter file. And we are pervasive in every county. That means that we're able to find, whether it be Nacogdoches County or Travis County, we're able to find and help election administrators find somebody from each party to be able to work together to administer that election at each polling location. And there are 10,000 polling locations in Texas. I think one of the most concerning things, though, is the empowerment of poll watchers to be able to disrupt and the disempowerment of election judges to be able to remove those disruptors. And this won't happen in nice, well, I should say affluent neighborhoods. It'll happen in low income and minority neighborhoods. And you don't have to take my word for it. You can Google Harris County poll watcher video, and the video will pop right up. Where they say, the Republican Party of Harris County, not to, this is just who they are, I'm not trying to be partisan about it. They say in their own words that they are recruiting an army to watch places like Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church, which is a large African-American congregation in Houston. So for those reasons, we found it to be quite concerning and worthy of continuing our advocacy in the judicial branch. And make no mistake, they will come back for more. The forces of voter suppression want more. It's already tried to happen. In the third special session, they tried to push an Arizona-style audit of the 2020 election. It was not on the call, but the Senate passed it anyway. The governor instead announced the audit of 4 counties, Dallas, Collin, Tarrant, and being y'all's area, and then Harris County being the 4th. They also tried to increase penalties in Senate Bill 10. And there's a big backstory on this. In Senate Bill 1, they reworked a number of criminal statutes. They actually increased the number of new offenses, the things you could be prosecuted for. And in that rework, lowered some of the penalties as part of this whole reworking of the statute. But the forces of voter suppression politicized it. They chose to tell half the story and say that the alleged lower criminal penalties, neglecting to talk about all the new things, the new crimes that have been created. The Senate passed Senate Bill 10, but the House withstood the pressure on both the audits and Senate Bill 10, and these bills did not advance. But we feel pretty certain we'll be seeing them again at some point, either in another special if it happens, or the next regular session. Which brings me to now and what happens next. Now it's your turn. We're now making the pivot as a state from the legislative life cycle, from legislating to elections. And make no mistake, there will be another election. None of the changes in Senate Bill 1 stop there from being another election. And the candidates are making their moves right now as we speak. There's announcements and retirements on a daily basis. Elections are where we register our pleasure or displeasure with our government as citizens. And as people of faith, they are where we assert our values. And Texas Impact would assert that one of those values is community. Helping people assert their most basic constitutional right. The constitutional right that preserves all other rights is not a partisan activity. It is essential to community. And another aspect of community is being local. So I think too often we focus on things that are happening at a federal level, coming down from DC. And we think this is backward. And we also think it's problematic. We think it ought to be driven, community driven, local issues pushing up to the federal level. Now, redistricting makes this challenging, but not impossible. Now, there are 1,100 municipalities, 1,200 school boards, 254 counties. Texas is a giant state, and we have to leave those local issues to you and your local congregation. But as a state organization, the place we'd encourage you to engage is with your state House member first. Each House district is about 194,000 people now. It's about the size of the city of Mesquite. So if you watch what people often refer to as down ballot races, you're going to see some major shakeups, which is always true after a redistricting cycle. And this is going to be true in both parties. 95% of them will be decided in March, which is 4 months away, 4.5 months away. Very close in time in the next primary, which means we need you to look at your context. Again, anybody who tells you that this is going to be all fixed in 2022, no matter, and just register enough people and it's all fixed in 2022, that's disingenuous. This is a way of life. This is a commitment we make to for decades. And what it means for you and your community really depends on your context. The context of Rains County is different than the context of Dallas County and where you live in Dallas County. So depending on where you live, really look at which party primary in which your vote is most effective for advancing your values. If you hear what I'm saying, that's your individual choice, clearly, but that's the thing you should look at as an individual. But I want to, before I kick it to my colleagues, I want to talk about congregations. We've always needed, but now especially since in this time and with the legislation they just passed, it's especially true. We've got to have congregations help folks vote. What that looks like really depends on where you live. Like any mission project, look at the needs of your community. So are you near a university or college campus? Is your church located near one? If so, you should look at helping college kids with changes of address and registration issues. Are you predominantly in ministry with senior citizens or have immunocompromised individuals? If so, then you really need to help with vote by mail. Are you in a transitioning suburb? Maybe you have a health clinic, then you need to be helping those new citizens vote and making sure people who aren't citizens are clear on what the law is so they don't mess up. Are you in an African-American community? Friendship West Baptist Church is really doing great work and should be a model. They knew that large geographic swaths of South Dallas had very long lines, lacked polling locations, and needed election judges. They responded by helping the county find locations and find judges. It's a super smart thing dealing with those structural issues, because often the excuse for intentional discrimination is, oh, we just can't find enough locations or we can't find enough election workers, because they know long lines disenfranchise those communities. So if you're involved in the work, as they are, they know if that's true or not. And so it's very important to be in that way. And lastly, we're here to help. I want to kick it to my colleagues to make sure that they talk about ways in which we're here to help.
So thanks, Josh. I know that is totally drinking from a fire hose. I'm going to talk to you in a super concrete way about the congregational side. So one, can you put up that whatever? I have one handout. And
I'm gonna do a screen share.
Yeah.
You're dating yourself, Bee.
I know.
Oh no, which one is it?
Do advanced screen sharing
That's
options.
right. That's the step I always
Okay.
miss. Nope, that's not the step I miss. What is this?
Oh no, we're a co-host. Hang on.
You should be able to share.
Yeah, did you
I thought I just,
hold on.
that's
There,
the one.
that's
No,
the
no,
one.
this is how I do it.
Okay.
I don't know how to do it.
Everyone has their gifts.
This is not mine. Why want to get out of the way though?
Do you want to send it to me and I can share it?
If it doesn't come
This
up in a
is it,
second,
but I
okay,
can't-
just do share. Just do share.
I got, oh, right.
There we
Okay.
go. We are seeing
There
2022.
you go. Now, yeah, there you go. Okay. All right.
Usually practice that.
Okay. So the thing I want to talk about is timing. And
So for all those
timing-
listening, you're showing a calendar.
Yes, for people who are listening, I'm showing a calendar, and the calendar starts today. It starts October 21st of 2021, and it says you are here, and it ends at the end of 2022. And when you look at the calendar, which we will be posting variations of this on our website and putting them in materials that we hand out from now till the end of 2022, what you'll see is a couple of things. One, that just as far as election cycles, they go in waves. So there are periods when there's a lot of activity. There are deadlines that come up, and the first day of voting and the last day of voting and all of those things. And then there are these sort of fallow periods where there's not any deadlines happening. However, if you look at the liturgical calendar and the kind of United States government calendar of holidays overlaid on those two things, you'll see that there are really pretty specific windows of opportunity for congregations to plan to do activities that are going to be generally election mobilizing activities that then probably won't happen for a bit. So in other words, if you decided, so let's say in January of 2022, you get done with your holiday celebrations and you come back to the office and you come back to worship and you're probably back in person. So that's great. And about the middle of January, everybody says, elections are coming up in March. we should do registration. We should be registering people to vote. Well, I'm just going to tell you in my tradition, the Presbyterian tradition, I'm an elder, I'm on the session. And so once a month I have a meeting. It was last night was the one, and the one in January will be on January 19th. And so if my church was going to decide to do a big voter registration project, and we talked about it on January 19th, I hope everybody can see this. I know it's pretty small, but you may notice that the deadline for registering to vote for the primaries is January 31st. So it's pretty unlikely that between January 19th and January 31st, we would have been able to do much of a robust program. What that tells us is we need to be looking at when the deadlines are for election activities and then walking back, not just, it would take me a month or it would take me 6 weeks, but you want to leapfrog over parts of the liturgical and just secular holiday calendars as well. Because realistically, for example, Thanksgiving is November 25th. And if you haven't already decided by November 25th that you're going to do something related to registering voters or providing election information or anything like that, it's going to be challenging during the month of December, during the month of January, to get anything going that's going to have the kind of impact that you want. Conversely, however, if you decide now that you're going to go big and you're really going to try to do something that, as Josh describes, is place-based and well thought through, nonpartisan and thorough, you have plenty of time right now to plan to do something that is appropriate for your congregation. What might that be? Well, Josh was describing a couple of projects. One has to do with helping vulnerable people, seniors, people with disabilities, people who need to vote by mail, to help them do that in ways that are legal, in ways that don't interfere with their agency in casting their own vote. And you can do that. We had churches last year in Texas Impact had several kind of pilot programs, I guess, where congregations made available to members of their own congregation applications and help them understand how to get them mailed back in and how to check and make sure that they arrived, and made, kind of double check with people all the way through that they really got their ballot in the mail. This year, we're doing a project, I will just say, because it's my own church, I can kind of, I guess, use them as a guinea pig a little bit. The University Presbyterian Church is doing a project where we have a booth out. We are located across the street from the University of Texas. So we have a booth 3 days a week for several hours a day. We have church volunteers who are doing voter information. And it's everything from, you can come up and someone with a laptop will help you check if you are registered to vote. For a lot of students, they come and it turns out they are registered to vote, but not in Travis County. They're registered in their home county. So they can look up where they would need, how they could get a ballot by mail from their county, wherever it might be, or else they can start making plans to go home for the weekend so they can vote during early voting. They can find information about where to vote, what's on the ballot. And then also, and this, I really want everyone to kind of remember what Josh said, that this is not going to be something where success is going to be measured in 1 year, everything will be great, elections will be solid, people will be happy, the 2023 legislative session is going to be full of progress and issues that we all love. That's probably not the way to think about success. But a way for the faith community to think about success is, I will just say, it's evangelism, right? So if you are doing things that are mobilizing people to use their voting rights, if you're making it possible in one way or another for people to vote, to understand what they're doing, to again, own their own sense of agency in the democracy, people will know that you were the reason that happened. And so we have students, just again, to use university as an example, we have students who are coming to University Presbyterian Church's booth to see if they are registered to vote. If they're registered in Collin County, someone's helping them figure out how to do a ballot by mail. They're also picking up some information about University Presbyterian Church's campus ministries, I will say, right? They will also remember that a church helped them vote, right? And so I think what we want to be thinking about is not, and it's going to be hard, but particularly when you look at this calendar, I mean, if it's not giving you hives, I need to blow it up bigger so you can see it better. It feels like it is coming like a freight train, right? It's easy for our members of our churches to feel like that, to feel like, oh my gosh, everything is on the line. We have this one chance and all that kind of hyper feeling stuff. I encourage all of us to think instead about the deep work of the church in our local places, in our local physical locations, and to think about how we can serve as an actual foundation for democracy in those places. And so, because part of the point of this presentation is kind of a teaser, a pitch for November 13th, I will say what we're planning to talk about at this event on November 13th is real concrete ways for congregations to do what I just described, to understand their local context and do election mobilization projects that are place specific, that are sensitive to the particularities of the congregation, that are sensitive to the particularities of the vulnerable people that you may serve. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott to kind of bring us home, but I hope that you will look at this calendar and understand that when we are doing an event on November 13th, which I don't appear to have specifically marked on this calendar, that's too bad, I should have, but notice that's not about the election that's just happened. It's about these elections that are months later that we need to start preparing for now.
Yeah,
Scott?
I feel like that's important to note, because when I mention this to people, they're like, wait, November 13th is after the election on November 2nd. And I said, yes, that's right. We're working ahead to get ahead of the March 1st election. So that's a good thing to just emphasize.
Scott, you're on.
Right. Yeah. Yes. First of all, thanks for having me, and thanks for being Josh taking everything I was going to say, but let's see if we can close it out. I'm going to try to leave a few minutes here at the end, so I'm going to try to go quickly. I'm going to start out with a question, though, that I hope has an obvious answer, and you can either keep B slide up or take that down. I'll defer to y'all on that. So, question for the group. Is there a group in your community who is willing and able to do the important work of protecting democracy and ensuring that despite efforts to suppress votes and to cast doubt on our democratic systems, have the people power and processes in place to help make sure that our elections are safe and fair for 2022 and beyond? Anybody have a group of people who might be interested in that kind of work? I hope the short answer, hey, Darlene, I hope the answer is, y'all, this is a no-brainer for churches. If the people that I know on this call, if the congregations that I know are represented, if I know anything about y'all, it's that y'all have groups of people who care about our communities, who care about democracy, who have people from across the theological spectrum, have people across the political spectrum, and know how to organize volunteers to serve their communities. And the good thing, sometimes we'll have congregations that say they can't get involved in particular issue advocacy because it might seem partisan. I would argue with that sometimes. But on elections, like, this is a nonpartisan process, and we need people of all stripes to participate in the process. And so my hope is that each of us and each of our congregations will spend some time thinking about how we can mobilize people in our communities, in our congregations, to do this important work, to make sure that our democracy stays strong in 2022. I have trouble saying that, 2022 and beyond. And so we've already talked about a few examples of congregations who've done that. Josh talked about Friendship West, who looked at the needs of their community and said, what we really need in our context is to make sure that we have polling locations and that we have adequate election workers to make sure the communities of color have places to vote with as short of lines as possible. Bee talked about her church, University Presbyterian Church, that set up, I guess, what we're referring to as a kiosk. Well, first of all, I guess last election cycle identified a need as being COVID-19 and figuring out how people could learn how to safely vote by mail. And so they organized volunteers to make telephone calls and get information in the hands of eligible voters, called all the people 65 plus, and helped walk them through the process of making sure that people could vote safely by mail. This time, recognizing they're across the street from the University of Texas, Hook 'em Horns, they're working with college students to make sure that they know if they're registered to vote, know where they're registered to vote, try to get some of those young people to volunteer to work as election workers, make sure they know that there's an election currently going on, doing all of the work necessary to make sure that that population is engaged in democracy and helping support those processes. And so I guess the challenge that we'll have for each of y'all today, and the challenge that we'll spend more time talking about on November 13th, is to challenge congregations to figure out what populations they can serve, what populations they can reach out to. And I think Bee and Josh both mentioned, right? You might have a transitional housing facility that you partner with. You might have a food pantry at your church. You might have a daycare on your campus. Who are the populations that you can reach out to, and how can you help make sure that they're participating in elections? How can you make sure that you're mobilizing your congregation and people who are active in your church to make sure that they're signing up as election workers, poll watchers, et cetera? And so that's the conversation we hope to start today. It's the conversation we hope to continue on November 13th. So I do want to punt on the rest of my time and have a chance for questions and answers. But before I go, just a couple of quick reminders. Texas Impact is going to continue to resource this work in the months and years to come. If you're not on our email list, I'd encourage you to go to texasimpact.org and sign up for the e-news. If you ever have questions about any of this, you can reach out to any of us. We'll post our, or I'll go ahead and post my email, scott@texasimpact.org for those listening. If you have questions or need more information, you can certainly follow up after today. But really appreciate y'all taking the time today. And with that, we'll save a few minutes for questions.
So Kim, I know you had a question, and I welcome you to go ahead and come and unmute yourself and ask it. I think it kind of got resolved in the chat, but it'll be helpful just for everybody listening to have that question read aloud.
Yeah, I think I'm not clear. I know that there was a proposal that election officials cannot distribute applications for vote by mail unsolicited. So, or something along that line. What passed, and how does it impact those of us who I am currently walking my neighborhood registering voters, but I also want to distribute vote by mail applications? I'm trying to find out what the law is and whether that's restricted to individuals who are not part of elections department.
You're fine.
Okay.
But the bigger answer is yeah. So the county can't just mail out applications to everybody they think is 65 plus, or they can't mail them out to just everybody and let you figure it out. Somebody has to take an affirmative action to request it from the county before they can send it out. That only applies to government employees. It does not apply to you as a private individual. In fact, there was a lot of legislative back and forth, but that's where we landed. You will be fine.
Great. Thanks.
Hey, this is Darlene. So for clarification, because we've had voting drives and things like that, voters registration drives throughout the community on the east side of Temple. So if they're one of those who are authorized to register people to vote, they can distribute.
As long as they're not being paid, right? A VDR can distribute the applications.
Tell you what, since we're being recorded, how about we chat about this offline so I can research it and get back with you?
Okay, thank you, Scott.
Let that be a promo to come on November 13th,
I
right?
stumped Scott.
That's Josh, but
I mean,
always
Josh,
me, Darlene.
it never stump Scott, right?
Other questions from anybody?
I want to just jump in real quick and say, because I forgot to say this earlier, one of the benefits to having Texas Impact, I think, exist is that we're able to answer context specific questions. So like the questions that you guys are asking, we're able to dig in a little deeper if you contact us directly. The reason that we're able to do that is because we do have support from faith communities around the state. And I think the thing that I would want everyone on this call to understand is how deep and strong the support of the North Texas Conference has been. Texas Impact is meaningfully stronger than we would otherwise be because the annual conference as a whole and individual congregations and people in the annual conference have been so supportive financially, but also in making opportunities like this for us to speak, in guiding our work. And, Phil and JD Allen, our other board member, are great participants in the board. So I hope you feel that this is a partnership that we have with you and that we're not just sort of talent from Austin and Huntsville that are, coming on your podcast one time to say some stuff. We know you and we are prepared to work right alongside you to make sure that this works for all of you.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, Bee. That's helpful. I'm going to just take a moment too, just to ground us theologically, because what I try to do often in our church and society conversations is call us back to our social principles in the United Methodist Church. And in the social principles under the political community, there's a paragraph that says our involvement in political systems is rooted in the gospel imperative to love our neighbors, to do justice, and to care for the vulnerable. As United Methodists, we acknowledge that love requires responsible political action and engagement aimed at the betterment of society and the promotion of the common good. We acknowledge that such political engagement demands humility and mindfulness of our own complicity in perpetuating injustice. It also necessitates compassion, prayer, and a willingness to discern God's guidance. So again, this is in the United Methodist Church Social Principles 2022 edition. This isn't just, people often will say like, well, the church shouldn't be so political. Well, it turns out like, as United Methodists, we're rooted in this work. And there's a great Wesley quote right above it too that I won't read, but this is very much a part of who we are as a denomination. And I don't think we're alone in this, right? Obviously, Bee, you're talking about the Presbyterian Church. I know the ELCA is very much involved in this. I actually had a conversation yesterday with a Presbyterian campus minister at SMU who's really excited about our event on the 13th and figuring out how they can mobilize on the SMU campus to start getting making sure students are registered. So this is, again, you're paving the way. You're helping us give great examples of ways that we can mobilize in our communities and who those people are. And so I really hope folks can turn out on the 13th to be a part of this event. We don't have a spot yet where we're going to have it at. We're going to work on that. I'm going to meet with the Texas Impact staff here soon, and we'll get some more details ironed out about it. And we'll get a registration up and make sure that gets posted all over the interweb so people can find it anywhere and everywhere. So any other questions though, be that theological or practical or political, given the conversation?
Yes.
Well, I will say this, that I appreciate you, Phil. I really do. I know this is being recorded, so I'll choose my words wisely. If I could just get two of you in the Central Texas Conference, where would we be? So I just thank you for that. And so I will make sure that I do all I can to continue to work on this from that angle. I participate in so much in the North Texas Conference because I don't have a platform in the Central Texas Conference, but I'll see what we can work out. Thank you for all that you do.
No, that's great, Darlene. I have a couple of people in the Central Texas that might be good to connect you with too, because I think they're there. We know that they're there. We just got to get connected. So Alex, what was your question? Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, my name is Alexander Clark. I'm an attorney here in Dallas. Very interested in voting rights. That's why I went to law school. But I feel like this separate question of outside of the rights fight that we're having in legislation and lawsuits and all that is this question of engagement and voter registration and getting people to actually participate, right? That's what I'm interested in right now as well, because elections are going to come before any of this is sorted out. I'm interested in doing a fundraiser for an organization to do this kind of work, engagement, outreach, registration, and all that. If money was being funneled into Texas Impact, how would that extra money be used for those purposes? Like, what would you envision its use?
That's a great question.
That's a great
Boy,
question.
Waited 11 years for that question.
Wow, no kidding. So
Like if it was earmarked for that specifically.
I have two answers to that question right off the top of my head, because I've been talking about them all week. One is for us to know that for us to be effective, for Texas Impact to be effective in doing the kind of mobilization that you're describing, that we're describing, we have to be able to resource congregations at a pretty granular level. We have to be able to get them tools. We have to be able to be on the phone to talk to them if they have a question. So one thing we are really needing is to be sure that we have staff dedicated just to that activity, so that when somebody calls the office, Josh or Scott or I don't say, we'd love to talk to you, but we just don't have time and you're not big enough or you're not in an area that, so that's one thing. The other thing, which is kind of so one is very personal. The other one is very broad, and that are broadly applicable. We've learned over the past 5 years that one of the things that helps people vote is certain kinds of practical information that they get delivered to them on their phone or on their devices through social media, through digital ads, that's not hot button or partisan, but that's like, click here to find the actual polling locations in your area and when they're open. We've done that. We've seen actual increase in voter turnout, and regardless of party, in places where we've been able to do that. And we've seen that putting ads on social media that are not, again, not partisan and not hot button, but that are more like, I'm planning to vote and here's my plan. We had a whole campaign on planning to vote, how you're getting, I'm planning to vote early. I thought I'd go after work. Makes people feel like it's doable. It's not too hard to get Texans to register to vote. It's apparently very hard to get registered voters to turn out. And the reason is not ideology or partisanship or anything like that. It's things like, I wasn't sure where I would park when I went to go in the building to vote. So I think that mass media approach is something that really, really does help with that. We know that's true because we've seen it work. And on Texas Impact side, I'd say we need to be able to deliver on the kind of help that congregations tell us they need. So long answer to a pithy question, and I'd love to talk to you more about it.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate that. I know we're running up on our time here, but I want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to ask a question if they have it. It was mentioned in the chat, is it okay for Central Texas Conference people to come? Absolutely. This is not limited to North Texas Conference. We'll have it as a hybrid event. So even if you can't make it in person on the 13th, we'll have a stream of it. You can join us online as well. It's also, like I said, not just going to be United Methodist. It will also be ecumenical. I know we're, again, Bee's Presbyterian, and I just mentioned a Presbyterian campus minister who is interested. So we'd love to have anybody who's interested in mobilizing.
Darlene, can you email me your question? And I'll get you a more formal answer. I'm 99% sure, but I want to be 100% sure.
I will. I will.
You've got Scott's email in the chat, and Josh's and mine are just the same. Mine is B@Texas Impact. Josh's is Josh at Texas Impact. Scott's is Scott at Texas Impact.
And it's
All-
.org, right?
All of it's .org. That's right.
You know, I give out your email addresses, you know, like people give out candy. So, I
Sure.
mean,
Sure.
okay. Great.
Well, friends, if none other, then again, thank you to the Texas Impact staff and for all that you do. I appreciate everyone's time and taking this opportunity during lunch to come, and all who are listening later. Thanks for taking the time to listen. And we do hope we'll see you on the 13th. So keep an eye out for registration opportunity for that, and we'll get all that information going. So, B, Josh, Scott, really grateful for all the work you do. We will talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Thanks.